Zaviaun Harold, and I'll be your host today. We are going to talk about what has been happening to children and their families that are from Syria, which is located in the Middle East. I have two guests that will be joining me in this discussion, my mother and my cousin. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Zaviaun Harold. I'm a supervisor of social work over at Memorial Regional Hospital.
Hello, my name is Nadine Benjamin. I am a high school teacher from New York, New York.
The children of Syria have been living in a war zone for a lot of years, and many have been living on the streets without food or water. They live in horrible conditions, and almost all live in constant fear for their lives. Their parents are unable to work and have difficulty getting the basic supplies they need, like food and clean water, to survive. Many have no future because they are living under the ruling of the Islamic State, which is known as ISIS. ISIS is a terrorist group that claims authority over all Muslims, but uses violence as a way to instill fear in their communities and beyond. Because of this, many children are taken away from their families and people they know and are put in detention camps that are even worse. Hundreds of children have died in these camps, and many were better off living on the streets with their families. The camps are supposed to offer them a better life, but they are worse. Most cannot even go to school, and even if they could, the schools are overcrowded, making it difficult to learn, to read and write. When the children get sick, they do not get the proper medical care they need and end up getting sicker. These camps are no place for children. My first question is, how do you think you would feel if you was one of the children going to the detention camp?
Thanks for having me on your show, your podcast. So the question you asked is, how would I feel if I was one of the children going to the detention camps? I think I would be very scared, especially being removed from my family, my parents. I'd be, in a constant state of fear, especially if I wasn't even sure of the reason why I was actually being removed from my families. And then on top of that, from what you were saying, the conditions in the detention centers are supposed to be better, but they're actually worse. So imagine having to be removed from your family. And then after being removed from your family, you're placed into essentially, it seems like a concentration type of camp. So I'm pretty sure I'd be very scared, praying that I'd be able to go home at some point and be reunited with my family.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Zamri. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think I would feel a sense of loss because not only have I lost my normal way of life, going to school, learning, being connected with friends and family, but then also fearful of my everyday life, fearful of the uncertainty of tomorrow and what it can bring. I know that you mentioned, Zaviaun, that people even die. Children are dying at these detention camps, which is unthinkable. Just thinking about being younger and not understanding necessarily the complexities or the reasons why you're there, but just still having to deal with the impact and how hard that must be. So I think this is a great issue that you're bringing up, and thank you so much for also having me on your podcast.
If I was in these camps, I would feel so afraid. The children are taken from their mothers, and I cannot imagine being taken away from my mom or dad and made to live in dirty conditions and being abused. I know I would not survive. Many organizations around the world, like Save the Children, are fighting to save these children and return them home. The camps that they are put in are in horrible conditions, and many just waste away. The Save the Children organization provides protection and support when they can, but it is not enough, and they cannot save them all. Save the Children is urging countries to bring their children home. Many children are still waiting to be returned home, and they stand a chance of living a normal life and get the treatment they need. While countries like Canada are saying they have returned many or most of their nationals, they have only repatriated a few. Russia and Central Asian countries have repatriated nearly twice as many as all Western nations combined. My second question is, what would or could you do to help the children now?
Great question. So you said your question is, what would or could I do to try to help those children now? I think, even what you're doing now with having this podcast, I think it's a big help because basically we're just trying to advocate for these families and these children that are in this particular situation. Raising awareness on social media platforms is very important. Social media is everywhere. So the more that we talk about these issues, the more people become educated and can do their own research on how they can help. These organizations like Save Our Children also may be donating to some of those foundations so that they can get the financial means to the actual families and the children, you know, for like food, for shelter, for clothing, so that, you know, they don't go back to living in the conditions they're currently living in. So I think just raising awareness would be how I could help to try to bring awareness to this particular issue.
Thank you. I agree with that sentiment as well. And Zaviaun, you have exposed me by raising awareness, as mentioned, to organizations such as Save the Children. I was less aware of what they were doing to intervene with like a lot of the ethical issues that these children of Syria are facing. But I think something that I could and will continue to do is use my platform in a positive way. So that means as a member of, you know, a different country, being a US citizen, I have freedom of speech, right? There are some liberties that other people are not afforded in different places of the world. So I can use my constitutional right to freedom of speech to spread awareness, as are you, like doing right now. I can call my local legislators so ensure that they are aware of what's happening and do something about it. I think also just like from a domestic standpoint, because I do live here, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
I agree with that.
Thank you so much for sharing. My last question is, how do you think the children would be living now if they weren't living in a war zone in Syria?
That's a great question, Zavion. To be honest, I'm not quite sure of what daily life looked like for the children of Syria before the war. However, I would imagine it would resume a sense of normalcy. So, whatever that looked like for the children of Syria pre war. So, you know, I'm imagining them being able to go to school. I'm imagining them being able to hang with their loved ones, friends, and families. It's hard to do that right now, Zavion, because ultimately they are focused on their primary needs. So I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the very base of the pyramid is this sense that, like, to really be a human, you have to have your physiological needs met. So that's safety, that's water, that's shelter, things like that. And ultimately, if they're not having access to that and they're fearful for their safety and security, which is the next level, they can't ever fully reach their potential. So I would just imagine that, you know, if they weren't living in a war zone, they would be able to fully grow and lean into the full human experience. Sammy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with like what you're saying. And so, how would the children of Syria be living today if they weren't going through a war? I could assume that they'd be living a relatively normal life. I don't really know what life was like for Syrians prior to the war to really give a great comparison, but from my experience, I haven't really heard much about Syria prior to really them being in the war. So I can only assume life was normal for them. They didn't have much controversy going on over there. So if they weren't going through war now, I'm sure they wouldn't be as concerned about, you know, having food and shelter and being separated from their families. The kids would be going to school, getting an education. All of those things should be the same as if it was before the war, without having to worry a lot about all of the things that are currently happening since the war and being separated from their families. Maybe maybe you, Zavion, can tell us a little bit more about what life was like for them before the war. Thank you.
This was a great discussion, and I thank both of you for sharing your thoughts on such an important matter. Life in Syria before the war was much like any other country. Although there were people from different cultures, Syrian people had stable lives and appeared to be happy. Syria was not a rich country before the war, but many people could work, farm, and provide for their families. They also had many beautiful sights that brought many people to see them as tourists. Slowly, their lives began changing with their new governments. Different cultures and their opinions eventually led to the beginnings of the war, with the different cultures fighting each other. The government made it worse by torturing people who had different opinions. Today, the sites have been destroyed by war, and the roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals have all been destroyed, and it will be very hard for them to rebuild them without money. Today, about 70% of Syrians now live in poverty. Even though the people there are poor, they still deserve to be with their loved ones and not placed in detention camps with worse conditions. These children are dying and more needs to be done to help and save them. Most importantly, they need to be reunited with their families. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. You can find more information on this topic from the sources I use, which are Human Rights Watch, Save the Children, UNICEF, and the authors Newland and Sparks. Thank you so much for being here today.